You woke up this morning and knew exactly who you were. You knew your name, your history, what you like, what you can't stand, what you want. You knew which memories were yours and which feelings belonged to you and no one else. But here is the thing that nobody tells you. That certainty, that familiar, unquestioned feeling of being a continuous, stable self, is not a fact. It is a performance. And your brain has been rehearsing it for so long that you forgot you were the one writing the script. What if the self you carry around every single day is not something you discovered? What if it is something you invented, piece by piece, and then forgot that you built it? That question sounds like philosophy. But the answer is buried in decades of neuroscience, and it is stranger than anything philosophy alone could have predicted. Start with memory. Because memory is where most people anchor their sense of self. You know who you are because you remember what happened to you, your childhood, your relationships, the moments that shaped you. That continuity, the thread connecting your past self to the person reading this right now, feels like proof. Proof that there is a you, moving through time, accumulating experience, becoming something. But your brain does not record experience like a camera. It reconstructs it. Every time you remember something, your brain does not retrieve a stored file. It rebuilds the memory from fragments, pulling pieces from different regions, filling in gaps with information that fits what you already believe, subtly editing the emotional weight of what happened based on everything that came after. Psychologist Daniel Schachter at Harvard has spent decades mapping this process. He calls it memory reconsolidation. Every single time you access a memory, you change it. The retrieval itself is a rewrite. The memory you carry of your childhood home is not the original experience. It is a reconstruction, shaped by years of telling and retelling, filtered through every version of yourself you have been since then. The memories that feel most like proof of who you are may be the least reliable evidence you have. Your brain does not tell you this, of course. It presents every memory with the same felt sense of realness. The invented details do not feel invented. The edited emotional tone does not feel edited. From the inside, remembering feels like discovering. But from the outside, looking at the data, it looks much more like creating. And if the memories that define you are not fixed records, then what exactly are you? Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio spent years searching for an answer to a version of that question. He studied patients with damage to specific regions of the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex and the structures involved in emotional processing and somatic signaling. What he discovered dismantled one of the oldest assumptions about human consciousness. When those regions were damaged, patients did not simply become less emotional. They became unable to make decisions, unable to prioritize, paralyzed by ordinary choices that a healthy person would make effortlessly. Damasio concluded that rationality and selfhood are not the products of pure thought. They are built on the body's signals. The self, he argued, is a biological construction, assembled in real time from the body's sensations, its memories, its predictions, and its emotional states, running continuously, updating constantly. You are not a fixed thing looking out at the world. You are a process the world is running through. Think about what that means across time. The version of you at age 9 had completely different fears, completely different beliefs, completely different ideas about what mattered. The version of you during your worst period organized itself around a story that the current version of you might barely recognize as true. The version of you that exists right now holds some beliefs with absolute certainty that a version of you 10 years from now will find surprising or even embarrassing. Which version is the real one? The philosopher Derek Parfit gave his life to that question, and his answer was one of the most quietly radical ideas of the 20th century. He argued that personal identity is not what we think it is. There is no deep, unchanging thing, no soul, no essential self, no irreducible core that travels through time inside you. What persists is a series of overlapping mental states, connected by memory and psychological continuity, but not identical across time. You share memories with the child you were, and you share memories with the person you will be in a decade. But none of these is the same person in any meaningful sense. Every cell in your body has been replaced. Every belief has shifted. Every fear has reorganized itself around experiences you could not have anticipated. Parfit called this the reductionist view. The self reduces to something simpler, a bundle of experiences and mental states, strung together by narrative, mistaken for a single continuous thing. And his conclusion was not despair. For him, it was strangely liberating. If the self is not this precious, fragile, fixed thing that must be protected at all costs, then its loss is less of a loss, and its change is less of a threat. But why does it feel so fixed? Why every morning do you wake up feeling immediately, unmistakably like you? Because your brain built a narrator. Faced with the chaos of continuous sensation, shifting emotion, fragmented memory, and constant prediction, your brain needed a way to create coherence. So it constructed a story with a consistent main character, a recognizable voice, a traceable history. A story that explains past behavior, anticipates future behavior, and makes sense of the present moment. That story is running constantly, in the background, stitching together the raw material of experience into something that feels unified. That story is what you call yourself, and like any narrator, it is not always telling you the truth. Neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga discovered this in one of the most revealing experiments in the history of brain science. He studied patients who had undergone a procedure that severed the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of fibers connecting the brain's left and right hemispheres. In these patients, the two halves of the brain could act independently, without communication. What Gazzaniga found was that the left hemisphere, the language-dominant, reasoning side, would invent explanations for behaviors caused by the right hemisphere, behaviors it had no access to and no knowledge of. The left brain did not say it didn't know. It confabulated. It generated a story that felt completely true, completely confident, and was completely fabricated. He called this the interpreter, a mechanism whose job is not to report reality accurately, but to construct a coherent self-narrative out of whatever raw data is available. And the interpreter runs in every one of us, constantly, whether or not the hemispheres have been severed. Every time you explain why you made a decision, every time you describe what kind of person you are, every time you tell someone what you believe and why, the interpreter is working, and it is working very hard to make sure the story stays consistent. Right now, even as you watch this, the interpreter is composing a story about what kind of person watches things like this, what it says about you, what you believe, where you fit. It is not retrieving a fact. It is generating a meaning. Here is what makes this stranger still. Because if the self is a story, it can be rewritten, not as a metaphor, as a measurable fact. Research in cognitive behavioral therapy has demonstrated repeatedly that when people change the narrative they hold about themselves, not just their behavior, but the underlying story that explains and predicts their behavior, measurable changes follow in mood, in anxiety levels, in perceived identity. The brain does not cleanly separate a story that happened from a story told convincingly enough over time. Both leave traces. Both reshape the narrator. The boundary between remembered experience and practiced belief is not as clear as we assume. Psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett has pushed this even further. Her research on predictive processing describes a brain that is not reacting to the world so much as constantly modeling it. Your brain generates predictions about what is about to happen, then updates those predictions when reality doesn't match. Your emotions, Barrett argues, are not automatic responses. They are predictions, constructed, not triggered. And your sense of self is part of the same predictive architecture. The brain runs a continuous simulation of who you are, refreshing it moment by moment, calibrated against memory and expectation, and the state of your body right now. You are not a stable object in the world. You are a simulation running in real time, and simulations are sensitive to their inputs. That is why a single conversation with the right person can reorganize how you see yourself in ways that last years. That is why a new environment can suddenly make aspects of your personality emerge that you did not know were there. That is why trauma rewrites the self so thoroughly, not because it creates a new person, but because it floods the simulation with data that forces the model to update. The story changes, and because the story is the self changes. This is not comforting or frightening in a simple way. It is both comforting, because the version of yourself you find least acceptable right now is not the final version. The story is not finished. The narrator is not fixed. Every new piece of experience, every practice, every belief you consciously engage with or discard is a new input into the simulation. The model can update. It is designed to. Frightening, because the identity you defend most fiercely, the one that makes you angry when it is questioned, the one you have organized entire life decisions around, may be a very well-practiced hypothesis, not a bedrock fact. And other people's stories about you have been quietly updating your simulation your entire life, without you fully realizing it. Think about the last time a single comment from someone you respected shifted how you saw yourself, even briefly. Think about how quickly a new role or a new relationship can make you feel like a different person, not because something fundamental changed, but because the story found a new context to run in, and the simulation generated a new output. The interpreter does not like being seen. It prefers to operate in the background, invisible, narrating without being noticed. The moment you notice it, something strange happens, because now there is a you that is watching the narrator, and something must be watching that watcher, and something watches that. The recursion has no clear bottom. Most neuroscientists working today believe there is no final observer at the top of that stack. No single point behind your eyes where everything converges into a unified self. What feels like a unified self is an emergent property, something that arises from millions of simultaneous neural processes, none of which are individually you, but which together produce the undeniable sensation of being someone. You are a pattern that learned to call itself a person. And patterns are not fixed. They are not fragile. They do not shatter when they change. They find new shapes and remain recognizably themselves. Water is still water whether it is ice or river. A melody is still the same melody played in a different key. The pattern that is you has been shifting and reforming your entire life. And every single morning you have called it by the same name. Maybe that is not a delusion. Maybe that is the most honest thing there is. The daily act of waking up and repeating the story until it feels true enough to live inside. The choosing, however unconscious, however habitual, of which threads to follow and which to quietly let go. The insistence on continuity in the face of constant change. Because the self is not something you found, buried inside you, waiting to be uncovered. It is something you keep making. And this morning, when you woke up and knew exactly who you were, that certainty, that familiar, unquestioned sense of being you, you were not remembering something permanent. You were telling the story again,